The Galactic Federation faced its darkest hour as Supreme Chancellor Keith Moran of the Depths Folk emerged from the Emergency Council session with news that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. The Void Plague had consumed another 7 star systems in the past month alone, bringing the total loss to over 30% of inhabited space. The remaining civilizations watched in growing terror as the plague accelerated its march toward the galaxy's core worlds. Keith Moran's aquatic form trembled as he addressed the assembled representatives through the Chamber's Universal Translator system. His species had ruled the oceans of their homeworld for millennia, masters of patience and long-term planning, but even their ancient wisdom offered no solutions to the crisis that consumed everything in its path. The traditional quarantine methods had failed completely, and entire sectors now stood empty where thriving civilizations had existed just years before. On the plague-ravaged world of Kepler Prime, Dr. Elena Vasquez crouched behind the ruins of what had once been the planet's greatest city. Her environmental suit registered dangerous levels of void energy in the atmosphere, but her human physiology showed no signs of infection or distress. Around her, the landscape twisted in impossible ways as reality itself seemed to bend and break under the plague's influence. Elena had volunteered for this suicide mission against direct orders from Earth's government, using one of Captain Torres's stealth ships to penetrate the quarantine zone. Her partner, Professor Dan Mitchell, worked beside her as they collected samples and data that no alien scientist had been able to gather. The plague could not touch them directly, but it created horrific illusions designed to drive observers to madness and despair. Dan's archaeological expertise proved invaluable as they explored the infected regions. The plague did not simply destroy civilizations but seemed to feed on their cultural achievements, leaving behind twisted monuments to hopelessness and defeat. Ancient libraries became mazes of despair. Art galleries displayed only images of surrender, and grand temples echoed with the sound of prayers for death rather than salvation. Their most disturbing discovery came in the planet's former Capitol building, where they found the preserved records of the plague's arrival. The infection had not begun with physical symptoms but with a gradual loss of hope among the population. Citizens simply stopped trying to solve problems, artists abandoned their work halfway through, and scientists gave up on research that might have saved them. Back in the Sol system, Admiral Carol Thompson reviewed Elena's reports with growing understanding of their enemy's true nature. The plague was not a disease in any conventional sense, but rather a cosmic entity that consumed the will to live. It grew stronger with each victory, feeding on the despair of entire civilizations until it could manifest physically and remake reality according to its twisted desires. Intelligence Officer Sam Parker maintained his secret network of alien contacts despite the increasing danger to those who communicated with humans. His latest intercepted messages painted a picture of galactic civilization in complete collapse. The Andromedan colonies had sealed their borders and were preparing for siege, while the crystalline Veltar had retreated into their homeworld's core and refused all outside communication. The most heartbreaking reports came from individuals who begged for human help despite knowing the penalty for such contact. A young scientist from the Kepler system transmitted detailed observations of the plague's behavior before his world went dark, while a poet from the Vega colonies sent verses that seemed to draw strength from human literary traditions she had studied in secret. President Santos convened daily meetings with Earth's leadership to discuss the increasingly desperate situation. The barrier around their system had become both protection and prison, keeping humanity safe while the galaxy died around them. Long-range sensors showed the plague's expansion accelerating, and computer models suggested complete galactic extinction within 5 years if current trends continued. Dr. Rodriguez's research had revealed why humans remained immune to the plague's influence. Human consciousness operated on quantum frequencies that the plague could not perceive or manipulate. More importantly, human emotions like hope, determination, and stubborn refusal to accept defeat were toxic to the entity, causing it physical pain when encountered in sufficient concentration. The breakthrough came when Nina analyzed brain scans from Elena and Dan during their mission to Kepler Prime. Despite experiencing horrific illusions and psychological attacks, their neural patterns remained stable and actually grew stronger under pressure. The plague's attempts to break their spirits had instead reinforced their natural resistance, creating a feedback loop that damaged the entity itself. Captain Ben Torres returned from his most dangerous reconnaissance mission with evidence that changed everything. Deep in plague-infected space, he had discovered that some consciousness remained within consumed worlds. The plague did not actually destroy its victims, but trapped them in nightmare realities where they experienced eternal defeat and despair. Billions of sentient beings were still alive, but imprisoned within the entity's twisted version of existence. Ben's discovery meant that the plague could potentially be reversed if enough concentrated hope and determination could be brought to bear against it. The trapped populations could be freed, their worlds restored, and their civilizations rebuilt. But such an effort would require humanity to work directly with other species on an unprecedented scale, sharing their immunity and teaching them to resist despair. Professor Mitchell made an even more significant discovery while analyzing ancient ruins on multiple infected worlds. The plague was not unique, but part of a cycle that repeated throughout cosmic history. Previous galactic civilizations had faced similar entities, and some had found ways to defeat them through cooperation between species with different strengths and abilities. The key lay in something the ancients called the harmony resonance, a state where multiple species work together with perfect trust and mutual support. The plague could not survive such cooperation because it fed on division, mistrust, and isolation. When different forms of consciousness linked together in common purpose, they created a frequency that was actively harmful to entities like the plague. Elena's team made their most important discovery in the ruins of Kepler Prime's great university. Hidden in a vault designed to survive any catastrophe, they found research notes from the planet's final days. The scientists there had been working on a solution based on ancient texts that described species working together to defeat similar threats in the distant past. The research suggested that humans were not the only species with unique abilities, but they were the only ones capable of inspiring others to use their gifts. Each alien species possessed some form of natural resistance to cosmic threats, but they had forgotten or suppressed these abilities over millennia of peaceful civilization. Human influence could reawaken these dormant talents. Chancellor Kethmaran faced the impossible choice that would define his species' legacy. The Galactic Council's pride had led to humanity's exile, but their survival might depend on swallowing that pride and asking for help. Secret communication suggested that some species were willing to consider reversing the banishment, while others preferred extinction to admitting their mistake. The tipping point came when the plague reached the outer colonies of the Federation's core worlds. Panic spread through the remaining civilizations as refugees flooded the inner systems, bringing tales of horror and complete helplessness in the face of the advancing entity. Traditional weapons were useless. Conventional defenses offered no protection, and even their most advanced technology could not slow the plague's advance. Dr. Chen completed his analysis of the plague samples that Elena had smuggled back to human space. His findings confirmed their worst fears and their greatest hopes. The entity was indeed artificial, created by a species that had been consumed by despair and wanted to share that fate with the entire galaxy. But it also had weaknesses that could be exploited by beings who understood the power of hope and cooperation. Amy Foster piloted the stealth ship Terra's Hope on a reconnaissance mission to the Federation's capital world, gathering intelligence on the government's state of mind. What she found was a civilization paralyzed by fear and pride, unable to ask for help but also unable to save themselves. The young pilot realized that humanity might need to take action whether they were asked or not. As reports arrived of the plague's accelerating advance toward the galaxy's most populated regions, humanity prepared for the moment when their exile would end. They had spent years growing stronger in isolation, developing technologies and abilities that could turn the tide of the cosmic war. The question now was whether the galaxy would accept their help before it was too late. The dangerous species that had been banished for disrupting the established order was about to become the established order's only chance for survival. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched for miles in every direction, its crystal walls reflecting the light of 1,000 different suns. Representatives from across the galaxy had gathered for what many considered the most important meeting in galactic history. The air hummed with tension as beings of every shape and size took their positions in the massive chamber. Zixi Thorin, of the Veltar species, stood at the center podium, his crystalline body casting rainbow patterns. On the floor below, his voice carried across the hall without need for amplification, reaching every corner where the various alien representatives waited. The topic of today's emergency session was simple, yet unprecedented. What to do about humanity? Captain Jake Morrison had no idea that his recent mission would lead to this moment. 3 weeks ago, he had commanded the exploration vessel New Horizon on what should have been a routine diplomatic visit to the Andromedan colonies. The mission parameters were clear. Establish peaceful contact, exchange basic cultural information, and return with a preliminary trade agreement. Instead, Jake and his crew had managed to violate 17 separate galactic protocols in the span of just 4 days. The first violation occurred when they discovered ancient ruins on the third planet of the Andromedan system. Despite explicit warnings that the site was forbidden, the human crew could not resist investigating. Dr. Alex Chen, the ship's xenobiologist, had argued that the ruins might contain valuable scientific knowledge. Jake agreed, and they spent an entire day exploring the underground chambers that had been sealed for over 10,000 years. The second major incident happened when they encountered a group of enslaved miners working in the asteroid belt. The galactic protocols were clear about non-interference in local labor disputes, but the humans could not simply watch beings suffer. Jake ordered his crew to provide medical aid to the injured workers, while his communications officer, Lieutenant Sam Parker, began teaching them basic human rights concepts. Within hours, the miners had organized their first strike in centuries. But the final straw came during the diplomatic dinner with the Andromedan leadership. Ambassador Lisa Harper was supposed to deliver a simple greeting and exchange gifts. Instead, she spent 3 hours sharing stories of human history, art, and culture. Her passionate descriptions of human achievements inspired several young Andromedans to question their society's rigid caste system. By the end of the evening, protests had begun in the capital city. Now Zix Thorin presented these incidents to the council as evidence of humanity's dangerous nature. His crystalline features remained emotionless as he spoke, but his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. Humans, he argued, possessed an uncontrollable urge to interfere with the natural order of things. They refused to accept that some knowledge was forbidden, that some suffering was necessary, and that some systems could not be changed. The Veltar representative displayed holographic evidence of human activities across the galaxy. Every world they visited experienced some form of disruption. On Kepler 7, human traders had introduced new farming techniques that doubled crop yields but also challenged the traditional power structure. On the water world of Aquatica, human engineers had solved a century-old water purification problem that the local government preferred to keep unsolved for political reasons. Ambassador Harper rose to defend her species, her voice steady despite the overwhelming odds against her. She argued that humanity's curiosity and compassion were strengths, not weaknesses. Humans had already contributed valuable innovations in medicine, engineering, and agriculture to dozens of worlds. Their willingness to challenge unjust systems had freed countless beings from oppression and suffering. Dr. Chen, observing from the human delegation section, noticed something the other species seemed to miss. The council members who spoke most passionately against humanity were those whose worlds had experienced the most positive changes from human contact. The Andromedan representative complained about increased civil unrest but failed to mention that their planetary happiness index had reached an all-time high. The Kepler 7 delegate protested disruption of their social order, but did not acknowledge that their population was healthier and more prosperous than ever before. As the debate continued, Chen began to understand the real reason behind humanity's trial. Hidden in the Council's classified medical databases, which Sam Parker had quietly accessed during a previous diplomatic visit, was information about something called the Void Plague. This cosmic disease had been slowly spreading across the galaxy for over 2 centuries, consuming entire star systems and leaving behind nothing but empty space. The plague fed on despair, hopelessness, and acceptance of defeat. It could not survive in the presence of beings who refused to surrender, who insisted on finding solutions to impossible problems, and who maintained hope even in the darkest circumstances. Chen realized with growing horror that humanity possessed a natural immunity to the void plague, not because of their biology but because of their psychology. The other species feared that if humans discovered this immunity, they would become too powerful to control. Worse yet, human influence might make other species immune as well by teaching them hope, determination, and the refusal to accept defeat. The galactic civilization preferred controlled weakness to chaotic strength, even if that weakness made them vulnerable to extinction. The vote was swift and decisive. 847 species voted to exile humanity to their home system, while only 3 voted against the measure. The Council authorized the construction of an impenetrable energy barrier around the Sol system, effectively quarantining the entire human race from the rest of the galaxy. Jake Morrison watched the proceedings through a live transmission aboard the New Horizon, still docked at the Andromedan station. His crew gathered around him as the verdict was announced, their faces showing a mixture of anger, confusion, and determination. They had less than 72 hours to return to Earth before the barrier would be activated, trapping any humans still outside the Sol system. As the New Horizon began its journey home, Jake addressed his crew over the ship's communication system. He spoke of the choice they faced. They could accept this exile with bitterness and despair, or they could use this time to grow stronger and prove that humanity's dangerous qualities were exactly what the galaxy needed. The crew's response was unanimous, reflecting the spirit that had led to their banishment in the first place. They would not simply accept their fate. They would prepare for the day when the galaxy would need them again. Because Jake Morrison and his crew understood something the Galactic Council had failed to grasp. Humanity's greatest danger was also their greatest gift, and gifts were meant to be shared. 8 years had passed since the Great Barrier sealed humanity within their home system, and the Sol system had transformed beyond recognition. What the Galactic Council intended as a prison had become humanity's greatest laboratory, a place where their dangerous creativity could flourish without outside interference. Commander Kate Sullivan floated in the observation deck of Titan Station, watching the construction crews put finishing touches on the massive orbital habitat circling Jupiter. The structure was 10 times larger than anything humans had built before the exile, its rotating sections providing artificial gravity for over 2 million inhabitants. Through the viewport, she could see similar stations under construction around Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, each one a testament to human ingenuity unleashed. The barrier that was meant to contain them had actually freed them from galactic regulations and limitations, without the need to conform to alien safety standards or construction protocols. Human engineers had developed revolutionary new technologies. Kate's own uniform was made from materials that could withstand the vacuum of space while remaining as comfortable as silk, produced in zero-gravity factories that orbited Mercury. Chief Engineer Ryan Blake worked tirelessly in his laboratory deep within the asteroid belt, surrounded by experimental faster-than-light drives that operated on principles completely different from the galactic hyperlane network. His latest prototype could fold space-time without relying on the massive infrastructure that connected alien worlds. More importantly, it was completely undetectable by standard galactic sensors, a discovery that would prove crucial in the years to come. Ryan's breakthrough had come from studying human dreams and imagination rather than alien technology. He realized that consciousness itself could influence quantum mechanics at the subatomic level, and human consciousness operated differently from other species. Where aliens saw fixed laws of physics, humans saw suggestions that could be bent, with sufficient willpower and creativity. On Mars, Dr. Nina Rodriguez led the most secret project in human space. Her research team had discovered that human brain patterns operated on multiple dimensional frequencies simultaneously, allowing them to perceive reality in ways that other species could not. The implications were staggering. Humans were not just immune to certain cosmic phenomena, they were actually existing partially outside normal spacetime. Nina's laboratory was filled with volunteers who meditated while connected to quantum measurement devices. The results consistently showed that human consciousness could influence probability at the quantum level, making unlikely events more likely through sheer force of will. This explained why humans seem to have such incredible luck in desperate situations and why their presence made impossible solutions suddenly become possible. Captain Ben Torres commanded the most classified operation in the Sol system, Project Ghostwalk. His fleet of experimental stealth ships had learned to slip through microscopic gaps in the galactic barrier, invisible to alien sensors and undetectable by their monitoring systems. These reconnaissance missions had revealed disturbing trends across the galaxy that the Galactic Council was desperately trying to hide. Ben's latest report contained information that would have shocked the alien leadership if they knew humans possessed it. The Void Plague was spreading faster than ever, consuming entire sectors in weeks rather than years. Over 30% of inhabited systems had gone completely dark, their populations vanishing without a trace. The remaining civilizations were in panic, but their rigid hierarchies prevented them from acknowledging the scope of the crisis. Young pilot Amy Foster discovered something even more significant during a routine survey mission to Europa. Buried beneath miles of ice, her sensors detected artificial structures that predated human space travel by thousands of years. The excavation team found a perfectly preserved chamber containing artifacts that could only have been made by humans, along with a message recorded in ancient human languages. The message revealed that humanity had visited the galaxy many times throughout history, each time being exiled when their influence became too disruptive to the established order. The cycle had repeated for millennia. Humans would emerge into galactic civilization, their presence would inspire hope and change among other species, the ruling classes would fear loss of control, and humanity would be banished until the galaxy faced extinction without them. Amy's discovery explained why humans possessed such unusual abilities compared to other species. They were not native to Earth, but were descendants of galactic refugees who had been repeatedly exiled throughout cosmic history. Each exile had strengthened their unique traits, making them more adaptable, more hopeful, and more resistant to despair with every generation. The ancient message contained detailed information about the Void Plague and its true nature. The disease was not a natural phenomenon, but an artificial construct created by a long-extinct species as their final act of revenge against the galaxy that had destroyed them. It fed on negative emotions and grew stronger in the presence of hopelessness and despair. Dr. Rodriguez realized that humanity's natural optimism and refusal to accept defeat made them the perfect antibody against the plague. More than that, their presence could inspire similar resistance in other species, creating a chain reaction of hope that would starve the plague of its food source. Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Sam Parker had maintained secret communication channels with sympathetic aliens throughout the exile period. His network included scientists, philosophers, and rebels who had been inspired by human ideas during the brief period of contact. These individuals reported that many worlds were beginning to experience spontaneous outbreaks of hope and resistance, despite having no direct human contact for years. The human influence was spreading through ideas alone, transmitted through art, literature, and philosophy that had been shared during diplomatic missions. Alien poets wrote verses about never surrendering. Scientists pursued impossible research projects, and ordinary citizens began questioning systems they had never dared challenge before. President Maria Santos reviewed daily reports from across human space while sitting in her office aboard Earth's orbital capital station. The numbers were remarkable. Human population had grown by 40% during the exile. Technological advancement had accelerated beyond all predictions, and psychological wellness indicators had reached unprecedented levels. Isolation had not weakened humanity, but had allowed them to develop their full potential. Admiral Carol Thompson coordinated the defense of human space from her command center on Luna Base, but her real focus was preparing for the inevitable moment, when the galaxy would need them again. Her fleets trained constantly not for conquest but for rescue operations on a cosmic scale. Every ship was equipped with medical facilities, construction equipment, and supplies that could support alien populations. The most remarkable development was the emergence of young humans who seemed to possess enhanced versions of their species, unique abilities. Children born after the exile could influence probability more directly, communicate with alien technology through touch alone, and inspire hope in others simply through their presence. Amy Foster was part of this new generation, and her abilities had made the Europa discovery possible. As the 8th year of exile drew to a close, humanity prepared for what they knew was coming. The secret reports from Captain Torres showed that the galaxy was approaching complete collapse, with the Void Plague accelerating its consumption of inhabited worlds. The Galactic Council would soon face a choice between their pride and their survival. Dr. Chen finished his latest research report, which proved conclusively that humans could not only resist the Void Plague, but could actively cure infected areas through concentrated exposure to human hope and determination. The treatment would require humans to work directly with alien populations, sharing their unique psychological traits through close cooperation and mutual trust. Kate Sullivan stood, once more at the observation deck of Titan Station, watching the stars beyond the barrier. She knew that somewhere out there, civilizations were dying while the cure waited trapped in the Sol system. Humanity had spent 8 years growing stronger, not from hatred of those who exiled them, but from love for those they would eventually save. The dangerous species that had been banished for being too disruptive was about to become the galaxy's only hope for survival. The emergency transmission arrived at Sol Station during the early hours of what humans still called Tuesday, though Galactic Standard Time had long since replaced Earth's ancient calendar systems. Captain Steve Harrison was conducting routine patrol exercises aboard the command ship Terra's Defiance, when the communication array detected an incoming signal on frequencies that had been silent for 9 years. The message came directly from Chancellor Kethmoran himself, his aquatic features distorted by desperation and fear, as the holographic transmission played across the bridge of Harrison's vessel. The proud leader who had once voted for humanity's exile now spoke words that his species had never uttered in their 1,000-year history. They needed help, and they needed it from the very beings they had banished. Harrison's crew gathered around, the central display as the Chancellor's message played in its entirety. The Void Plague had broken through the Federation's core defenses and was now consuming systems faster than evacuations could be organized. The capital world itself faced destruction within weeks, and the remaining civilizations were paralyzed by fear and their own inability to comprehend an enemy that fed on their despair. President Maria Santos received the transmission simultaneously aboard Earth's orbital command center, where she had been coordinating humanity's response to the crisis they had seen coming for years. The Federation's request was carefully worded to avoid admitting their mistake directly, instead framing the situation as a temporary alliance to address a mutual threat to all galactic civilizations. The human leadership had been preparing for this moment since the day of their exile. Dr. Paul Anderson, now Earth's chief medical officer, had spent years developing treatments based on humanity's unique immunity to the plague. His breakthrough had come from understanding that the entity fed specifically on emotional states that humans naturally resisted through their stubborn optimism and refusal to accept defeat. Paul's research facility on Luna Base housed the most important medical development in galactic history, a treatment that could boost other species' natural resistance to despair and hopelessness. The process required direct exposure to human psychological patterns through shared experiences, meditation, and what Paul called hope therapy sessions, where humans and aliens worked together on seemingly impossible problems. Admiral Jack Wilson commanded the human fleet that had been secretly preparing for this mission throughout their years of exile. His ships were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, incorporating technologies that bent the rules of physics through focused human willpower and determination. More importantly, every vessel was designed not for conquest, but for healing, with medical bays, cultural exchange centers, and facilities for joint species cooperation. The fleet's flagship, Sol's Promise, carried a crew representing the best of human achievement and character. Navigator Lucy Turner had plotted courses through the most dangerous regions of space, using techniques that combined mathematics with human intuition. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Grace Lee had volunteered to risk her life treating alien patients, whose biology was completely unknown to human medicine. The decision to respond to the Federation's plea was unanimous among Earth's leadership, but not because they had forgiven their exile. Humanity had grown during their isolation, developing not just advanced technology but a deeper understanding of their role in the galaxy. They were not saviors or conquerors but catalysts, beings whose presence made positive change possible for others. Captain Jake Morrison, whose initial violations of Galactic Protocol had triggered the exile, now commanded the diplomatic vessel New Beginning. His crew included many of the same officers who had served with him during that fateful mission to the Andromedan colonies, and they understood better than anyone how human actions could inspire hope in other species. The human fleet departed Sol system amid ceremonies that were broadcast across Earth and its colonies, but there were no celebrations or speeches about revenge or vindication. Instead, President Santos addressed the departing crews with a simple message. They were going not as conquerors returning to claim what was theirs, but as healers answering a call for help from beings who had lost their way. Dr. Anderson accompanied the fleet aboard a specially equipped medical vessel, bringing with him the accumulated research of humanity's exile years. His team had developed portable immunity boosters that could temporarily protect alien populations from the plague's influence, buying time for more permanent solutions to be implemented through cooperation and shared hope. The journey to Federation. Space took weeks using the new human faster-than-light technology, but the fleet traveled not in haste but with careful preparation for what they would find. Intelligence reports from Captain Torres's reconnaissance missions painted a picture of complete civilizational collapse, with billions of refugees fleeing toward the galactic core while the plague consumed everything behind them. Amy Foster piloted her stealth vessel Terra's Grace ahead of the main fleet, gathering real-time information about the plague's current position and behavior. What she discovered was both terrifying and encouraging. The entity had grown incredibly powerful by feeding on the despair of entire civilizations, but it had also become more focused on emotional consumption and less aware of physical threats. The first test of human intervention came at the Rigel colony, a refugee center housing over 50 million beings from 17 different species. The colony's leadership had attempted to maintain order through strict rationing and martial law, but despair was spreading faster than the plague itself, as families were separated and hope for survival dwindled. Commander Pete Rogers led the first human intervention team onto the colony, bringing with him supplies, medical equipment, and something far more valuable, proof that the plague could be resisted. His team worked alongside alien refugees, sharing meals, telling stories, and demonstrating through their actions that cooperation and mutual aid were possible, even in the darkest circumstances. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Within hours of human arrival, the refugee camps began organizing themselves more efficiently. Despair gave way to determination, and the various alien species began working together instead of competing for resources. The plague's influence, which had been steadily growing stronger in the colony, began to weaken and retreat. Dr. Lee made her first breakthrough while treating Andromedan children who had been traumatized by watching their homeworld consumed by the plague. Using a combination of human psychology and alien medical techniques, she helped them process their trauma in ways that strengthened, rather than weakened, their natural resistance to despair. Intelligence Officer Sam Parker reestablished contact with his network of alien sympathizers, many of whom had been forced underground during the plague crisis. Their reports revealed that human influence was already spreading through the refugee populations, carried by individuals who had witnessed humanity's unique approach to impossible problems. The critical moment came when Chancellor Keth Moran arrived at Rigel Colony to witness humanity's intervention firsthand. The proud aquatic leader had never directly interacted with humans before, relying instead on reports and second-hand observations. What he saw challenged every assumption his species had made about humanity's dangerous nature. Jake Morrison met the Chancellor in the colony's former detention center, which human teams had converted into a thriving community center, where different species shared their cultures and worked together on reconstruction projects. The sight of former enemies cooperating willingly under human guidance forced Keth Moran to confront the possibility that his people had been wrong about everything. The Chancellor's conversation with Jake lasted for hours, covering everything, from the original reasons for humanity's exile to the current crisis threatening galactic civilization. Keth Moran began to understand that humanity's violations of protocol had not been acts of rebellion, but expressions of their fundamental inability to accept injustice and suffering as natural or permanent conditions. Dr. Rodriguez arrived at the colony with her team of consciousness researchers, ready to implement the larger plan that humanity had been developing throughout their exile. The plague could only be defeated through what she called cascade immunity, where human resistance to despair would spread through entire populations by teaching them to find hope in cooperation and shared purpose. The first large-scale test would require unprecedented cooperation between humans and the remaining Federation species. Every individual would need to contribute their unique abilities toward a common goal, creating the harmony resonance that ancient texts suggested could destroy entities like the plague permanently. As the human fleet prepared for the final phase of their intervention, word spread throughout the galaxy that humanity had returned not as conquerors seeking revenge, but as healers offering hope. The species that had been exiled for being too dangerous to galactic stability was about to prove that some forms of danger were exactly what a dying galaxy needed to survive. The final battle for galactic civilization began not with weapons or warfare, but with something far more dangerous to the Void Plague, a coordinated act of creation spanning dozens of star systems. The human fleet had positioned itself at strategic points throughout the remaining Federation space, each ship serving as a beacon of hope that other species could rally around in their desperate fight for survival. Commander Pete Rogers watched from the bridge of his vessel as the plague entity materialized in the space around them, no longer hiding behind disease and despair, but revealing its true form as a cosmic horror that existed to extinguish consciousness itself. The entity had grown massive by consuming entire civilizations, its dark tendrils reaching across light years to strangle the remaining pockets of galactic life. The creature's appearance defied description in any language, constantly shifting between forms that represented the deepest fears and despair of every species it had consumed. To human eyes, it appeared as an endless void that seemed to drain meaning from existence itself, but the human crews felt no fear or despair when confronting it directly. Dr. Rodriguez had positioned her consciousness research team at the center of the human formation, their equipment designed to amplify and broadcast the unique quantum frequencies that human brains naturally produced. The plague entity recoiled from direct exposure to these frequencies, writhing in what could only be described as cosmic pain as it encountered minds that refused to surrender. Communications Officer Betty Clark achieved the breakthrough that would determine the battle's outcome when she managed to establish contact with consciousness trapped within the plague-consumed worlds. Her discovery that billions of beings were still alive within the entity's twisted reality meant that the battle was not about destruction, but about liberation. Using humanity's natural empathy and their ability to inspire hope in others, Betty coordinated a galaxy-wide effort to reach these trapped minds. Human teams aboard ships throughout the infected regions began broadcasting messages of hope, determination, and stubborn refusal to accept defeat, creating resonance patterns that penetrated the plague's reality distortions. The entity's response was immediate and terrifying as it focused its full attention on destroying the human fleet. Reality itself began to warp around their ships as the plague attempted to trap them in nightmare scenarios, designed to break their spirits and add their consciousness to its collection of eternal prisoners. Captain Jake Morrison found himself commanding the massive carrier Soul's Promise in a space that no longer followed normal physics, where up and down were matters of opinion, and time flowed backward and forward simultaneously. His crew maintained their posts despite experiencing visions of their worst fears and most painful memories, their training and natural human stubbornness keeping them focused on their mission. The turning point came when Amy Foster piloted her ship directly into the heart of the plague entity, her enhanced human abilities allowing her to navigate the twisted space-time within its core. There she discovered the source of the entity's power, a massive concentration of despair and hopelessness, created by the extinct species that had spawned this cosmic revenge. Amy's transmission from within the entity revealed that the plague could be defeated, but only through a coordinated act of hope and creation performed by multiple species working in perfect harmony. The process would require every surviving civilization to contribute their unique strengths while trusting completely in their partners from other worlds. Dr. Anderson implemented the final phase of his immunity treatment program, using the human fleet as distribution points for psychological resistance boosters that spread throughout the remaining galactic populations. The treatment did not grant immunity directly, but awakened dormant abilities that every species possessed but had forgotten during millennia of peaceful dependence on others. The Andromedans rediscovered their gift for emotional harmony, able to synchronize the feelings of entire populations through shared meditation. The crystalline Veltar remembered their ability to store and amplify positive thoughts in their mineral matrices. The aquatic depths folk recalled their talent for long-term planning that could envision hope stretching across geological time scales. Chancellor Keth Moran coordinated the multi-species effort from his command center, his ancient pride replaced by wonder as he watched civilizations that had barely tolerated each other begin working together with unprecedented unity. The sight of humans serving as bridges between different species, facilitating cooperation through their unique ability to find common ground, revealed the true nature of their dangerousness. The plague entity began to weaken as the trapped consciousness within its core started to break free from their prison of despair. Each liberated mind added to the growing resonance of hope and determination, creating a feedback loop that caused the entity physical damage while healing the wounds it had inflicted on reality. Captain Ben Torres led a fleet of mixed human and alien vessels in coordinated maneuvers that were part space battle and part synchronized dance. Their movements created geometric patterns in spacetime that reinforced the positive emotional frequencies being broadcast by the consciousness researchers, turning the very fabric of reality into a weapon against despair. The entity's final, desperate attack came as it attempted to consume the human fleet directly, opening massive portals that led to the nightmare realm where it stored its victims. But instead of being trapped, human crews found themselves able to navigate the twisted landscape and begin evacuating the billions of consciousness that had been imprisoned for decades or centuries. Dr. Lee worked frantically to treat rescued beings whose minds had been damaged by prolonged exposure to absolute despair, using techniques that combined human psychology with the rediscovered healing abilities of other species. The medical stations aboard human ships became centers of interspecies cooperation, as different races shared their knowledge to heal the plague's victims. The plague entity began to collapse as it lost the energy it had stolen from its victims, but its death throes threatened to tear apart local spacetime and destroy everything within several star systems. The solution came from humanity's most dangerous quality, their refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. Jake Morrison coordinated the final phase of the battle, directing the combined fleet in an act of creation that reversed the plague's consumption. Instead of allowing the entity to die and take large portions of the galaxy with it, they channeled its collapsing energy into rebuilding the worlds and civilizations it had destroyed. The process required perfect trust and cooperation between species that had never worked together before, with humans serving as the catalyst that made such cooperation possible. Their natural ability to inspire hope in others created the psychological foundation for the technical miracle that followed. Amy Foster emerged from the entity's collapsing core with data that revealed the plague's ultimate weakness. It existed only as long as intelligent beings believed that some problems had no solutions. The moment every species in the galaxy simultaneously believed that any challenge could be overcome through cooperation and determination, the entity simply ceased to exist. The restoration process took months as worlds that had been consumed by the plague were rebuilt from quantum templates stored in the entity's former victims. Billions of beings were returned to life, their civilizations restored, and their cultures preserved through the heroic efforts of the multi-species alliance that humanity had inspired. Chancellor Keth Moran addressed the reformed Galactic Council from chambers rebuilt to accommodate the new spirit of openness and cooperation that had emerged from the crisis. His speech formally ended humanity's exile and invited them to take their place as full members of galactic civilization, but more importantly, it acknowledged the fundamental error in judgment that had led to their banishment. The galaxy learned that humanity's greatest danger had never been their technology, their aggression, or their unpredictability. Their true threat to the established order was their absolute refusal to accept that anything was permanently broken, that any problem lacked a solution, or that any being was beyond redemption. President Santos established the Institute for Cosmic Resilience in orbit around Earth, where humans and aliens worked together to study the nature of consciousness, hope, and the quantum effects of cooperation between different forms of intelligence. Their research ensured that no future cosmic threat could catch the galaxy unprepared. Captain Amy Foster took command of the first truly integrated exploration vessel, with crew members from 27 different species working together to explore the regions beyond the galactic rim. Her ship's name, Impossible Dream, reflected the human concept that had now spread throughout galactic civilization. When faced with the impossible, the proper response was to smile and demonstrate that impossible was just another word for a problem that had not yet been solved. The species that had been exiled for being too dangerous to galactic stability had proven that sometimes the most dangerous thing of all was hope itself, and that in a universe full of cosmic horrors, hope was exactly the kind of dangerous that every civilization needed to survive.